An entire continent was mapped with nothing but a song. The Pacific Ocean, a space larger than every landmass combined, was settled by people who used no compass and wrote nothing down. Their maps were not drawn on paper, but were instead woven into the very fabric of culture, held in memory, and performed through stories, chants, and celestial observation. This video explores the ingenious written cartography that mapped entire continents before European contact. By the end, you will see human history and intelligence in a completely new light, discovering that some of our greatest explorations were guided by sciences we have only just begun to understand. How did a dance contain the directions to a distant mountain? What kind of chart is made from sticks and seashells? We are about to decode the lost languages of the land and sea. What does it truly mean to know a place? That narrow definition of a map is a relatively recent invention. For most of human history, and for the vast majority of human cultures, a map was something you could hear, something you could perform, or something you could hold in your hands, crafted from the materials of the world it described. This is the crucial first step in our understanding. If we only look for folded parchment or engraved copper plates, we will be blind to the cartographic masterpieces that surrounded us. The true function of a map is not to be a static picture, but a functional guide. It answers practical questions. How do I get from here to there? What will I find along the way? Where is fresh water, or safe harbor, or sacred ground? Any system that reliably encodes that information and successfully transmits it across generations is a map. For the Polynesian navigators, the map was a complex star compass memorized from childhood, where the rising and setting points of hundreds of stars created a mental grid over the open ocean. For the Inuit traversing the featureless Arctic, the map was in the shape of the snowdrifts, sculpted by prevailing winds, telling a story of direction and distance. For the Aboriginal peoples of Australia, the map was sung. There are perhaps the most profound example of this living cartography. It is a narrative, a sequence of verses that describes a journey across the landscape. Each verse corresponds to a specific location, detailing its topography, its resources, its ancestral significance. To sing the song in order is to mentally walk the route. The rhythm of the feet matches the rhythm of the song, and the features mentioned in the lyrics appear in the world exactly when the singer reaches them. This isn't poetry about the land, it is a navigational database set to music. The song holds the directions. The map is performed into existence with every recitation. This transforms the very idea of knowledge storage. In a society without writing, information cannot be stored on a shelf. It must be stored in people. It must be memorable, transmissible, and vital enough to be worth preserving. The structure of a song, the pattern of a dance, the symbolism in a story, these are the frameworks that make such memory possible. They are the error correction codes and the backup systems for an entire library of geographical and ecological data. So when we speak of a stick chart from the Marshall Islands, a lattice of palm ribs and shells, we are not looking at a child's art project. We are looking at a three-dimensional training manual, a physical model of ocean swells and currents, used to teach the next generation how to read the sea itself. The map was not the sticks. The map was the knowledge the sticks represented, knowledge that could then be applied to the real, moving ocean. This is what scholar David meant when he said all knowledge is local, and maps assemble that local knowledge. A European portolan chart assembled the local knowledge of Mediterranean sailors about coastlines and ports. A Polynesian star compass assembled the local knowledge of Pacific astronomers about the celestial dome. Both are brilliant, context-specific solutions to the same human problem, how to not get lost. One was written in ink, the other was written in tradition. By expanding our definition to include these living, performed, and crafted representations, we begin to see the true scale of this lost science. We stop seeing emptiness on ancient charts and start seeing a different kind of fullness, a world mapped in memory, waiting to be heard. To navigate that vast blue library, you first had to learn its alphabet. For a Polynesian wayfinder, the night sky was not a random scattering of lights. It was a grand, rotating dome etched with precise pathways. They conceptualized a star compass, a mental construct that divided the entire horizon into 32 houses or directional sectors. Each house was named for a specific star or constellation that would rise or set at that exact point. The star Arcturus, for instance, was known as, and its rising point marked the path to the Hawaiian Islands. This was not a single map, but a dynamic, four-dimensional one. As the night progressed and the Earth turned, the wayfinder would mentally track the procession of stars from one house to the next, constantly updating their position. They knew that if they kept the setting point of the Southern Cross directly off the left side of the canoe, they were sailing due east. This celestial grid provided the unwavering constants in a world of moving water. But the sky was only half the story. The ocean itself spoke a complex language, and the wayfinders were fluent. Long before sighting an island, they could read its distant signature in the patterns of the sea. The primary text was the ocean swell, the deep, rhythmic pulse generated by steady trade winds and distant storms. A master navigator would lie in the canoe, feeling the set and rhythm of these primary swells against his body, using them as a steady reference line, like the North Arrow on a paper chart. Any disruption to this pattern was critical information. A reflected swell, bouncing back from an unseen island dozens of miles away, would create a subtle cross pattern in the water. The wayfinder would detect this interference, this echo of land, and change course toward its source. The library's other volumes were written in the air and by life itself. Certain cloud formations, like a stationary pileup over a warm lagoon, could betray an island's location far beyond the horizon. The flight patterns of birds were meticulous guides. Terns and noddies fly out from land to fish in the morning and return at dusk. Spotting a bird at midday, noting the direction it came from and the fullness of its crop, could give both a bearing and an estimate of distance. Even the taste and temperature of the water held clues, freshening as one neared the outflow of a large island streams. A navigator synthesized all this flowing data in real time, constantly updating a mental chart of their position, speed, and direction. There were no instruments to consult, no logbook to write in. The only record was the trained human mind, a mind that had spent years in apprenticeship, memorizing routes through chants and stories, learning to feel the planet's rhythms as a living system. This knowledge was not theoretical. It was proven on the most daring voyages in human history. In the 1970s, to demonstrate the system's power, a traditional double-hulled canoe named was built. Using only these ancient, written wayfinding techniques, Navigator guided the vessel from Hawaii to Tahiti, a journey of over 2,000 miles, without charts, compass, or sextant. His success was a stunning vindication. It proved that the settlement of the Pacific, across that immense triangle reaching to remote Easter Island and New Zealand, was not a series of accidental drifts, but a long campaign of intentional, skilled exploration. It rewrites the story from one of chance to one of genius, a testament to a science built from memory, observation, and a profound dialogue with the natural world. The ocean's star compass reveals one form of memory, but on land, an even more intricate system turned geography into music. Across Australia, for over 60,000 years, the landscape itself is a vast, sung atlas. These are or dreaming tracks, and they represent perhaps the most sophisticated written mapping tradition on Earth. It is not merely a story about the land, it is a functional sung set of instructions for traversing it. It charts the epic journey of an ancestral creator being, a giant kangaroo, a witchetty grub, or a rain serpent, as it moved across the primordial world. Every action of that being formed the terrain, leaving behind a hill, a water hole, a stand of trees, or a rock formation. The song that recounts this creation myth is meticulously structured, with each verse, each musical phrase, corresponding to a specific physical feature in the real world. To navigate from a sacred mountain to a distant river, you would not consult a parchment, you would sing the correct segment of the ancestral song. The rhythm of your walking matches the rhythm of the melody, and the landmarks described in the lyrics appear in the landscape precisely when you reach them. The song tells you when to turn left at the outcrop, where to find the hidden spring, and which valley offers shelter. It is a continuous audio guide played from memory that perfectly syncs with the territory it describes. But its function runs far deeper than simple direction finding. It is a layered repository of essential knowledge. Embedded within the verses is detailed ecological wisdom, the seasonal patterns of plants, the behaviors of animals, and the locations of vital resources. It is also a legal document, encoding the boundaries and responsibilities of different kinship groups, and a historical record, preserving the events of the ancestral past. To know the song is to have the right to be in that country, to care for it, and to understand its deepest meanings. Anthropologists described the entire continent as a sprawling, interconnected musical score. One could stretch for hundreds of miles, connecting communities who spoke different languages. As the track crossed from one language group's territory into another, the words of the song would change, shifting into the new local tongue, but the underlying melody and the landscape features it described remained constant. This created a continent-wide web of knowledge, a shared cultural map that transcended linguistic boundaries. The map was sustained not in archives, but in ceremony and daily life, performed and renewed with each generation. This living cartography challenges our most basic assumptions about how knowledge is preserved. In a system without writing, information must be too valuable to forget. That makes the knowledge unforgettable by weaving it into the very identity of the people and the land. Forgetting the song is not just getting lost, it is a spiritual and cultural rupture. The land and the song are one, and to sing it is to maintain the world itself. This means the map is never static or outdated. It is as alive and dynamic as the community that carries it, constantly reaffirmed through performance. So, while a European map of the time might show a coastline or a mountain range, the maps that same mountain with its creation story, its seasonal streams, its edible roots, and its ceremonial significance. One marks a location, the other conveys a complete relationship with a place. It is a mapping of meaning, not just of space, proving that to truly know a territory is to know its stories. While the wove direction into melody, another empire encoded its entire world into the landscape itself. In the high Andes, the Inca governed a realm of staggering complexity, a territory longer than the distance from Rome to Moscow, and they did it all without a single written word. Their administrative genius relied on a different kind of map, one that was not carried, but was permanently installed into the earth and the fabric of daily life. This was a cartography of power, memory, and cosmic order, built from lines in the earth and symbols in cloth. At the heart of their capital stood the Golden Temple of the Sun. From this sacred center, an invisible web of 41 precise lines, called radiated outward like spokes on a wheel. Each was a conceptual pathway, a straight line of sight across the rugged terrain that connected the temple to a series of specific shrines, or these were not grand buildings, but often natural features, a distinctive spring, an unusual rock formation, or an ancient tree, each one charged with ritual significance. The entire system organized over 300 of these sacred points into a meticulous spatial and social database. They were grouped by the four quarters of the empire, and the along them were used to mark time, with specific shrines linked to ceremonies for each month of the lunar calendar. This meant the landscape itself functioned as a giant, immovable calendar and a map of social obligations. A priest or administrator knew that when the sun touched a certain mountain peak, it was time for a festival at a particular spring 5 to the southwest. The empire was not just administered from, it was performed into unity through ritual processions along these prescribed lines, physically walking the map and reinforcing the cosmic order that bound the state together. But how was the intricate data of this system, the records of tributes, lineages, and histories, stored without writing? This is where the mystery of the unfolds. Were small, intricate geometric patterns, often arranged in grids, that were woven directly into the finest Inca textiles. Worn by nobility, these patterns were far more than decoration. Scholars now believe they formed a sophisticated symbolic language. Each geometric design, each step pattern or diamond shape likely represented a specific place, a social group, a deity, or a concept. A tunic covered in may have told the story of a ruler's lineage, the territories he controlled, or the sacred myths of his people. It was a wearable archive, a portable expression of the same cosmic order embedded in the lines. Together, these systems formed a complete cognitive framework for running a civilization. The system was the macro-scale map, the fixed infrastructure of sacred geography that organized time, space, and ritual. There were the micro-scale code, the symbolic language that carried the specific data of that system on the very bodies of the elite. One was etched into the mountains, the other woven into cloth. This reveals a profound principle, that cartography can be a tool of statecraft, embedded directly into architecture, ritual, and art. The Inca did not need paper maps because their entire world was already mapped, a living, three-dimensional model where every path, every shrine, and every pattern thread held meaning and maintained control. It was a map you could walk, and a map you could wear, proving once again that to navigate an empire, you first have to weave its story into existence. But how do you mark a path across 1,000 miles of shifting desert sand? You weave the directions into the story of the world itself. Across the canyons and mesas of the American Southwest, navigation was a sacred act, and the maps were written in stone and memory. Indigenous travelers did not follow trails as mere lines on the ground, they walked narratives. Their wayfinding markers were subtle, integrated into the land so deeply that to a passing outsider, they might be invisible. A simple pile of stones, a cairn, was not just a marker, it was a prayer stack, a respectful gesture that also said, "The path is this way." A petroglyph of a spiral or a bighorn sheep pecked into a rock face at a canyon junction did not merely say turn here. It told you which clan territory you were entering or commemorated a vision experienced at that very spot. Sometimes, the signposts were alive. Certain plants, like the hardy wolfberry, might be deliberately cultivated along reliable routes, serving as both a food source and a green beacon in an arid landscape. These physical markers, however, were just the punctuation in a much longer story. The true map existed in the oral traditions that guided pilgrims across vast distances. Consider the network leading to the Salt Lake, a sacred source of salt for countless communities. The journey to this inland lake was not a simple trek for a resource, it was a ceremonial pilgrimage. The route was memorized as a sequence of spiritual events and obligations. Each stopping point, each spring or distinctive butte, was linked to a story, a song, or a required ritual. A traveler knew that after the place of the three red rocks, you would reach the spring where the Salt Mother once rested, and there you must leave an offering before continuing. The landscape itself became a mnemonic device, a giant memory palace. Seeing a specific, twisted juniper tree would trigger the memory of the next verse in the guiding song, which would describe the canyon you were about to enter. This system wove geography and belief into an inseparable whole. You could not know the way without knowing the stories, and knowing the stories gave you a sacred responsibility to the places you passed through. This transformed a daunting continental crossing into a meaningful progression through a living, storied world. The destination was not just a physical location, but the fulfillment of a cycle, a renewal of covenant between the people and the land. The map was not a tool to conquer space, but a script to deepen your relationship with it. In this way, a continent was crossed not by conquering its emptiness, but by listening to its whispered directions, written in stone and remembered in song. Yet even the most vivid mental map sometimes needs a physical key. In the scattered atolls of the Marshall Islands, navigators created perhaps the most astonishing physical artifacts of written science, objects that look like abstract sculptures, but are in fact precise models of an invisible ocean. These are the stick charts, known as and. To the untrained eye, they appear as random lattices of thin, curved sticks, tied together with plant fiber and dotted with small shells or coral nodules. But to a Marshallese navigator, This was a three-dimensional textbook, a hydrodynamic diagram of the Pacific itself. The shells mark the positions of islands. The sticks, however, do not represent sailing routes between them. They map something far more subtle and powerful, the complex patterns of ocean swells. The Marshallese understood that the deep, rolling waves generated by distant trade winds, what they called the or backbone, would interact with the underwater slopes of an island. As these swells approached land, they would bend or refract around the mass. They would also bounce back, creating a complex interference pattern of crossing wave crests and calm spots that could extend for 50 miles out to sea. From the low perspective of a canoe, these patterns were impossible to see, but they could be felt, a subtle rise and fall, a shift in rhythm against the hull. The stick chart was a genius-level abstraction of this fluid physics. Each curved stick, carefully positioned on the chart, represented the predicted path of a refracted swell. The intersections and open spaces showed where wave trains would meet or cancel out. A student navigator would sit with his teacher on the beach, feeling the real swell with his body while studying the chart, learning to translate its elegant latticework into a tactile understanding of the sea. He learned that sailing toward an island, he would first feel the dominant swell from the east. Then, as he entered the island's wave shadow, he would detect the crossing, the ribs, the swells that had bent around the land from the north and south. The chart taught him to read this complex symphony of motion. It is crucial to understand these charts were never taken on voyages. The knowledge was transferred from the model into the navigator's mind and body. Once the lessons were complete, the chart had served its purpose. This makes them not maps for navigation, but maps for teaching navigation, a distinction that reveals their true sophistication. They are a crystallized theory of oceanography, a way of taking a vast, dynamic, and invisible force and giving it a fixed, tangible form that the human mind could grasp, memorize, and internalize. In that sense, a Marshall Island stick chart is a closer relative to a modern physicist's diagram of gravitational waves than it is to a European parchment chart. It does not just show where things are, it models how energy moves through a system. It is a map of relationships and forces, a concept so advanced that Western science would not develop similar models of wave refraction for centuries. These fragile constructs of palm, rib, and shell, then, stand as a monumental intellectual achievement. They prove that the drive to understand and model our world is universal, and that brilliance can be woven from the materials at hand, creating a science of the sea from the forest and the shore. But a map of moving water requires a different kind of stability, a reference point that does not change. For the Inuit traversing the vast Arctic ice, the map was written in the sky and felt beneath their feet, a living system where the land itself was never still. To an outsider, the frozen north might seem a terrifying void, a uniform sheet of white stretching to the horizon. To those born to it, it was a rich, detailed, and dynamic landscape, meticulously charted in memory and story. Their survival depended on reading the subtle language of the ice, a language with profound nuance. They recognized and named dozens of distinct types of ice. There was new, dark ice, thin and dangerous. There was thick, stable pack ice, and the jumbled pressure ridges where plates collided. Each type had its own sound, its own feel underfoot, and its own implications for travel. This knowledge was not academic, it was immediate and sensory. A hunter could tell by the color and texture whether the ice would hold his sled's weight, or if it hid a current of warmer water beneath. The map also charted the invisible life below. The location of seal breathing holes was critical, not just for hunting, but as waypoints and indicators of underwater currents. These holes were not random, they followed patterns in the ice's structure, patterns a trained observer could predict. The cracks in the ice, known as leads, were the highways of this frozen world. Opening and closing with the tides and winds, a network of leads could provide a clear route one day and a deadly barrier the next. Navigating them required understanding the deeper rhythms of the ocean and the moon. This entire body of knowledge was passed down not through manuals, but through immersive apprenticeship from the youngest age. Children learned by doing, by listening to elders' stories that encoded generations of observation. A tale about the trickster figure, fleeing across the ice, might subtly teach about the formation of pressure ridges or the behavior of ice in a storm. Songs held the rhythms of safe travel, the sequences of landmarks, and the proper rituals for respecting the spirit of the place. Above it all, the stars provided the fixed points in this shifting world. The constellation, what Western astronomy calls Gemini, was a primary guide, its position marking key directions and seasonal changes. The sky, the ice, and the stories were all parts of a single, integrated navigational system. This allowed for journeys of astonishing distance and precision across what appeared to be trackless waste. A hunter could leave his camp, travel for days across the dynamic ice using the stars, the wind-sculpted snowdrifts called that pointed like arrows, and his mental chart of reliable leads to arrive exactly at a distant hunting ground. It was a science of constant observation and adaptation, a conversation with an environment in perpetual motion. This proves a powerful idea, that the most challenging environments often produce the most refined and sophisticated sciences. Where a standard map would be obsolete the moment the ice shifted, the Inuit mental map was fluid by design, capable of updating in real time with every new crack in the and every shift in the wind. Their territory was not a blank space to be conquered, but a wise and demanding teacher, and they had learned its every syllable. The rainforest canopy creates a world where sight fails, but other senses become superhuman. In the Amazon, a realm so dense that European explorers saw only a green wall of chaos, indigenous navigators perceived a detailed living network of pathways. Their maps were not visual, but acoustic, olfactory, and botanical, a biocartography written into the very breath of the forest. The great rivers were the primary highways, but to travel them successfully required listening to the water itself. An experienced paddler could identify a specific tributary by the unique sound it made as it poured into the main channel, a subtle difference in pitch and rush created by its gradient and the shape of its bed. They navigated by ear, turning left or right based on a symphony of merging currents. The air carried clues as well. The distinct scent of a particular clay bank, rich in minerals, or the perfume of a flowering tree species that only grew at a certain confluence, served as olfactory landmarks in a landscape where everything looked overwhelmingly green. The botanical world provided the most detailed signage. A navigator's mental chart was filled with the locations of specific, useful trees, a towering Brazil nut grove here, a patch of medicinal cinchona bark there. These were not just resources, they were vital milestones. Knowing that after the third bend you would find the acai palm island meant you were on course, and it also meant you could eat. This knowledge created a map where ecology and route were completely fused. The path was defined by the life along it, and to know the path was to know the forest's gifts and secrets in intimate detail. This was a science of profound interconnection. A European map of the same era might dismiss the Amazon interior as a blank space, terra, because it lacked visible cities or clear landmarks from a distant, colonial perspective. But from within, it was a meticulously charted universe, every bend and backwater named and storied. The map existed in the collective memory of the people, passed down through stories that described journeys in terms of sensory experiences, not abstract coordinates. A grandfather might teach a child, "You will know the hidden channel to the good fishing grounds when you hear the water laugh over the flat stones and smell the wet kapok tree." This oral transmission wove survival skills, spiritual beliefs, and geographical data into a single, unforgettable narrative. To lose the stories was to literally lose your way in the world, a fate far worse than simple disorientation. It represented a rupture with the knowledge that sustained life. So while outsiders saw an impenetrable wilderness, those who belonged to it saw a home mapped in scent, sound, and leaf. A continent-sized forest known so completely that one could travel for months using nothing but the whispers of the water and the memory of a song. This reveals a staggering truth, that a place can only be called empty if you do not know how to look, or in this case, how to listen. The night sky was the one map that belonged to everyone, a silent clockwork of light visible from every corner of the planet. While land-based maps were sung and seafaring charts were felt, the celestial sphere offered something unique, a universal, unwavering reference frame. This was not a single tradition, but a global phenomenon, a foundational pillar of written cartography that cultures on every continent independently mastered. They looked up and saw not random sparks, but a grand, rotating dial, a celestial global positioning system written in constellations. The brilliance of this system lay in its perfect predictability. While landscapes shift and oceans move, the stars return to the same positions with mathematical precision, season after season, year after year. This reliability allowed for the development of true long-distance wayfinding. The North Star, Polaris, became the pivotal anchor for Arctic and Northern Hemisphere travelers, a fixed point around which the entire heavens turned, providing an eternal north. In the southern skies, where no single bright star marks the pole, cultures from Aboriginal Australia to the Maori of New Zealand used the Southern Cross and the dark spaces around it, like the Ceque Nebula, to triangulate due south. The Polynesian star compass we discussed earlier represents the apex of this science, a full mental construct of 32 directional houses. But the underlying principle was the same everywhere. Identify the fixed points, track the moving ones, and you can always find your way home. This astronomical knowledge was rarely stored as a dry list of coordinates. Instead, it was woven into the very fabric of culture through myth and story, making it unforgettable. Constellations were not seen as static pictures of animals or heroes, but as dynamic narratives of travel, transformation, and seasonal duty. The story of the constellation itself often contained the navigational lesson. For example, the Pleiades cluster, known as to the Maori or the Seven Sisters in countless traditions, was a critical seasonal marker worldwide. Its heliacal rising, its first appearance in the dawn sky, signaled a pivotal moment, the time to plant crops in the Andes, the start of a new year in Polynesia, or the beginning of a ceremonial cycle in North America. To know the story of the Seven Sisters fleeing across the sky was to remember the exact time of year they appeared, tying vital ecological knowledge to an unforgettable celestial drama. In this way, the night sky became a shared, global library of time and direction. A sailor in the Pacific, a hunter on the Arctic ice, and a trader crossing the Sahara might never meet, but they all learned to read the same celestial clock. They all understood that Orion's belt pointed one way, that the sweep of the Milky Way marked a path, and that the journey of the moon could measure the distance between islands. This independent convergence on the same solutions speaks to a profound human truth. When faced with the fundamental need to navigate, the human mind in isolation will look to the heavens and find order. It is a testament to our shared ingenuity, a science born from careful observation and encoded in epic tales, proving that the oldest and most reliable map was always hanging right above us, patiently waiting for us to learn its stories. These maps of sound and story are not just cultural artifacts, they are feats of cognitive engineering. The human brain is not a blank slate for memorizing lists. It is a pattern-seeking machine that thrives on structure, emotion, and narrative. The repetitive rhythm of a walking song, the predictable melody of a chant, these are not artistic flourishes. They are the essential framework that allows the mind to hold vast sequences of information without error. Think of a childhood nursery rhyme, something you learned decades ago and can still recite perfectly. The rhythm and rhyme act as a scaffold, locking each word into a specific, unchangeable slot. Now scale that principle up to an epic narrative that details every water source, mountain pass, and turning point across 1,000 miles. The formulaic structure of oral tradition, with its recurring refrains and set phrases, creates those same cognitive anchors for geographic data. A slight deviation in the verse would feel as jarring as a wrong note in a familiar song, immediately signaling a mistake in the directions. This turns the song into a self-correcting system, where the melody itself preserves the integrity of the map across countless retellings. Furthermore, stories transform abstract locations into places of meaning. Our brains are wired to remember narratives far better than we remember disconnected facts. A dry coordinate like 42 degrees north is easily forgotten, but the story of the trickster who turned into a rock at that very bend in the river creates a vivid mental image tied irrevocably to the spot. The location gains emotional and moral weight. It becomes part of a larger drama about creation, morality, or survival. This narrative encoding makes the information resilient. It is not just data, it is wisdom, and wisdom is too valuable to lose. The story ensures that the spring is not just a place to drink, but the place where the ancestral grandmother showed compassion, so you must treat it with respect. The map becomes a guide to both geography and proper living. This oral technology also built in a powerful form of data backup. Unlike a single, fragile parchment map stored in a library, this knowledge was distributed across an entire community, shared and reinforced through communal recitation during ceremonies, initiations, and seasonal travels. Every elder who knew the song was a living repository, and every child learning it was creating a new copy. If one person forgot a line, others would remember it. The system was decentralized and robust, designed to withstand the passing of individuals without losing the whole. It treated human memory not as a frail vessel, but as a dynamic, collective storage medium, honed by necessity into an incredibly reliable way to hold a continent. This reveals that long before we invented hard drives and cloud servers, we had already mastered the art of distributed data storage, using the most powerful processor we had ever known, the networked human mind, singing in unison. The map could also be danced. Across countless cultures, cartography was not a solitary study, but a communal performance, a way of writing geography directly into muscle memory and shared experience. When a community gathers to move through a ritual dance, they are often tracing a very real path across a very real landscape. Only the ground beneath their feet is the ceremonial space. Certain indigenous dances in the Americas, for instance, are not abstract expressions, but precise reenactments of ancestral migrations. The steps, the formations, the direction of turns, all correspond to the journey of a clan from an origin point to their present homeland. To learn the dance is to memorize the route, to feel in your bones the turns at the river forks and the pauses at the mountain passes. The performance space becomes a scaled-down territory, and the dancers' bodies become living plotters, drawing the map anew with every movement. This transforms navigation from a private skill into a public inheritance, learned not by reading but by doing, in the company of your entire community. The ritual procession takes this principle and projects it onto the actual land. The Inca system we discussed was not just a conceptual web, it was a network meant to be walked. Priests and pilgrims would physically travel the lines from the out to the distant, performing ceremonies at each point. With every step, they were not just visiting shrines, they were tracing the sacred circuitry of the empire, reinforcing the connection between the capital and its farthest reaches through the rhythm of their own footsteps. Similarly, the Christian Via, or Stations of the Cross, maps the final journey of Jesus onto the layout of a church or a hillside. Moving from station to station, they does not merely hear about the path, they walk it, embodying the narrative geography of the story. These performances are far more than commemorations, they are acts of embodied cartography. They accomplish something a parchment map never could, they create a visceral, emotional connection to the route. The soreness in your legs from the pilgrimage, the synchronized breath of the dancers, the collective focus of the procession, all forge a powerful memory that is both personal and shared. The map is learned through the whole self, not just the eyes and mind. In this way, the community collectively remaps and reaffirms its relationship with the territory. With each annual dance or ceremonial walk, the knowledge is renewed, tested, and passed on. The borders are remembered, the stories attached to each landmark are recited, and the younger generation learns their place within the spatial story of their people. It proves that a map can be an event, a temporal phenomenon that exists in the shared breath and movement of a group, dissolving the line between the chart and the journey itself. When the music stops and the procession ends, the landscape is not just remembered, it is felt. That living map, felt in the dance and sung in the story, would soon meet a system that could not comprehend it. When European ships first appeared on the horizons of the Americas, the Pacific, and Australia, they carried more than just people and goods. They carried an entirely different philosophy of space, one that was rigid, visual, and designed for possession. In their holds were compasses to find direction, sextants to measure the stars, and rolls of parchment waiting to be filled. Their goal was to fix the fluid world onto a flat, stable surface, to draw lines of longitude and latitude that would slice the globe into manageable pieces. For them, a map was an object, a tool of control that declared, "This is mine, and this is its boundary." This worldview collided catastrophically with the living cartographies we have explored. The European explorer, trained to see the world through the lens of his instruments, often looked upon a forest or a desert and saw only emptiness. He did not hear the describing every water hole. He did not feel the subtle swell patterns guiding canoes to invisible islands. He could not read the stories in the stones or the pathways woven into a dance. Because he could not see a drawn boundary or a fortified city, he frequently declared the land terra, land belonging to no one. This was perhaps the greatest cartographic error in history, not an absence of maps, but a profound failure to recognize their form. The intricate, performative maps of indigenous peoples were not just directions, they were legal documents, title deeds to country encoded in narrative. It did not just describe a route, it defined responsibility, connection, and belonging. To know and care for the land along the song was to hold the right to be there. This was a system of ownership based on relationship and custodianship, a concept utterly foreign to the European idea of property as a commodity to be bounded, bought, and sold. The clash was therefore not merely technological, it was epistemological, a battle between two ways of knowing. The European paper map, with its clear, bold lines, was an ideal tool for colonial administration. It allowed a distant king or governor to divide a continent he had never seen, to grant parcels to settlers, and to draw borders that cut directly through the heart of and sacred sites. That single, authoritative document on parchment could, with a stroke of a pen, invalidate of spatial knowledge and law. It rendered the living map invisible, and in doing so, facilitated the legal and physical dispossession of the people who carried it in their minds and ceremonies. The tragedy was that this new, imposed geography was often dangerously incomplete. A European map might show a river and a mountain range, but it would not show where the water was sweet in the dry season, or which pass was safe after the snowmelt, knowledge embedded in the very stories that were being dismissed. This created a double loss, the erasure of profound cultural intelligence and the imposition of a fragile, superficial understanding of the land itself. The continent was not empty, it was fully mapped in a language the newcomers were deaf to, and in their failure to listen, they declared the library silent and began burning its books. This collision of mapping systems created a profound and often tragic irony. The very explorers who dismissed these lands as uncharted wilderness found they could not survive within them without help. Time and again, the success or failure of a European expedition hinged on the guidance of an indigenous person, someone whose mind held the living map of the territory. These guides did not consult a piece of parchment, they listened to the land, they recalled the stories, they felt the way forward in a language their employers could not understand. The written map, for all its technical precision, was often useless on the ground without the oral key to decode it. A line on a chart might show a river, but it would not tell you which bend held a deadly whirlpool in the spring flood, or where the safe crossing point shifted when the rains came. That knowledge resided in the memory of the guide, in the seasonal verses of a song passed down for generations. When Europeans attempted to capture this fluid intelligence, to transcribe it into their own static format, something vital was always lost in translation. The process of putting it onto paper, for instance, reduced a sensory, rhythmic narrative into a mere list of place names. The crucial elements that made the map work, the rhythm that aided memory, the emotional weight of the stories that made landmarks unforgettable, the ecological cues embedded in each verse, all of that evaporated. What remained was a skeleton, a route stripped of its soul and its context. A written notation could not convey the specific sound of a river rapid that signaled a turn, a sound the guide knew by heart. It could not impart the ceremonial practice required when passing a sacred mountain, a practice that was part of the navigational protocol itself, ensuring the traveler maintained the right relationship with the place. The depth of ecological detail was flattened. A note about a berry patch failed to communicate that those berries were only ripe for 2 weeks in a specific lunar cycle, a temporal layer of knowledge essential for planning a journey. The written map, by its very nature, favors the visual and the spatial at the expense of the temporal, the acoustic, and the sacred. It freezes a moment in time, presenting a landscape as a permanent fact, when in reality, the most accurate maps are those that understand change, the seasonal ebb and flow of resources, the shifting patterns of ice and sand. The written systems excelled at this because they were living, constantly updated through observation and performance. A new song could be composed for a new route. A story could incorporate a recent event, making the map a growing, adaptive entity. The paper chart once printed was fixed. It could not learn. This reveals the core limitation. The written map is a tool for possession and inventory, while the sung or danced map is a tool for relationship and understanding. One seeks to capture the world, the other to converse with it. The guide who led the explorer to safety was not just reading a different map. He was engaging in a different way of being in the world, one where knowing a place meant knowing its stories, its moods, and your responsibilities toward it. The explorer, clutching his newly drawn chart, had gained a representation, but he had missed the conversation entirely. That conversation, once silenced, is now being heard again. The last few decades have witnessed a quiet revolution, a profound shift from dismissal to rediscovery, and most importantly, validation. The turning point was not in a library, but on the open ocean. In the 1970s, the voyaging canoe was built, a replica of the ancient Polynesian vessels. Its mission was to prove a point that the settlement of the Pacific was intentional. Navigator from the small island of guided the craft from Hawaii to Tahiti using only the stars, the swells, the birds, and the wind. He used no compass, no sextant, no written charts of any kind. When made landfall after its journey of over 2,000 miles, it did more than complete a voyage. It shattered a historical myth. It provided irrefutable scientific proof that this written science was not just real, it was breathtakingly precise. That successful journey sparked a cultural renaissance across Polynesia, reconnecting people with a heritage of exploration they had been told was impossible. It was living proof that the old ways worked, not as superstition, but as a rigorous, empirical technology of navigation. This physical validation opened the door for a much broader intellectual shift. Anthropologists, geographers, and ecologists began to approach indigenous knowledge holders not as subjects of study, but as colleagues and teachers. They started the meticulous work of documenting with Aboriginal elders, not by simply writing down place names, but by walking the country together, recording the stories in context, understanding how each verse aligns with a specific tree or rock. They began mapping star paths with Polynesian masters, not as folklore but as a complex astronomical system. This collaborative work revealed a stunning truth. These systems are not alternatives to Western science, they are complementary to it. They represent a parallel and equally valid pathway to understanding the world, built on a foundation of deep, sustained observation over thousands of years. For instance, is a dense database of ecological knowledge. It notes which plants flower when, where animals give birth, and how water flows after rare rains, information gathered and refined across countless generations. This is not myth, it is long-term environmental science encoded for transmission. Recognizing this represents a crucial form of intellectual decolonization. It moves us beyond seeing these traditions as quaint stories or spiritual beliefs, and acknowledges them for what they are: sophisticated sciences of place. They are the result of experimentation and adaptation, a continuous trial and error process that filtered out what did not work and preserved what ensured survival and harmony. This validation is not just about the past, it offers urgent insights for our future. In an era of climate change and ecological crisis, these written maps teach a fundamental lesson about sustainable interaction. They model a way of knowing that is based on relationship rather than domination, on listening to a landscape rather than simply extracting from it. They remind us that the most accurate map is not the one that shows you how to claim a place, but the one that teaches you how to belong to it. The silent libraries of stone and star and song are finally being read, not as curiosities, but as vital guides, offering a different kind of wisdom for navigating the world we all share. The human mind does not naturally think in coordinates or abstract lines. It thinks in stories, in rhythms, and in the feeling of a place. These ancient mapping traditions did not just happen to use song and dance, they were deliberately engineered to work with the brain's own operating system. They are, in essence, a form of cognitive cartography, in how to structure information so the human mind can hold on to it for centuries. The key is sensory integration. A modern paper map asks only your eyes to work, translating symbols on a flat surface into an understanding of a three-dimensional world. It's a brilliant but narrow form of communication. The stick chart lesson, the star chant, they demand your whole self. You hear the rhythm of the song, you feel the swell in your body, you see the star rise, you smell the flowering tree at the turning point. This sensory input creates a rich, interlinked web of memory. Each sense reinforces the others, so if you forget the words, you might remember the melody, and the melody brings back the image of the landmark. This is how the brain naturally builds understanding, by weaving together different threads of experience into a single, robust memory. Think of trying to remember a complex list of items for the grocery store. Writing it down is one method. But if you instead imagined walking through your house, placing each item in a specific, ridiculous location, like a loaf of bread balancing on the television and a gallon of milk in the shower, you would use a much older, more powerful memory technique, the method of loci. This is exactly what the does, but on a continental scale. It turns the landscape itself into a memory palace, where every hill and riverbank is a shelf holding a piece of vital information. The story provides the narrative glue that binds it all together, making the sequence of locations not just logical, but meaningful and emotionally resonant. Our brains are wired for narrative. We remember the plot of a movie far better than a random sequence of facts. By embedding the map inside a story of ancestral beings, these systems tapped directly into our deepest cognitive strengths. This reveals a profound insight about learning and memory that modern education is only beginning to fully appreciate. We often separate the logical from the creative, treating facts and stories as opposites. But these mapping traditions show that the most durable knowledge exists precisely where they meet. To remember a vast and complex territory, you do not fight the brain's nature, you collaborate with it. You give the information a rhythm, a character, a place in a grand saga. This principle has powerful implications beyond history. Modern therapies for memory loss, for instance, often use music and familiar stories to reconnect individuals with their past, because those pathways in the brain can remain open even when others have faded. Urban designers and architects could learn from this, creating spaces that are not just functional but narratively legible, where the story of a neighborhood is woven into its walkways and gathering spots, making it easier to navigate and feel connected to. These ancient systems remind us that knowledge is not just something we have, it is something we do, something we perform with our whole being. The map is not separate from the journey, the song is not separate from the land, and memory is not separate from the body. In honoring these lost sciences, we are not just recovering forgotten roots, we are rediscovering fundamental truths about the incredible, multisensory instrument we carry within us, an instrument perfectly tuned to sing the world into memory. The most profound difference lies not in the medium, but in the message. While a modern road map shows you how to move through a landscape, these ancient systems show you how to live within it. They treat the environment not as a static backdrop for travel, but as a dynamic, speaking participant in the journey. Every turn in a song, every marker on a star path, is loaded with ecological intelligence. This is a map that knows the land gets thirsty, that animals have schedules, and that a safe journey depends on perfect timing with the natural world. For instance, is a meticulous seasonal calendar. It won't just direct you to a valley, it will specify the verse to sing when the yams are ready for harvest in that valley, or when the monsoon rains have filled its water holes. The map tells you not only the where, but the crucial when, synchronizing human movement with the pulse of the ecosystem. It encodes the migratory paths of kangaroos or caribou, not merely as hunting information, but as waypoints that define the rhythm of the year. You follow the animals, and the song follows them too, creating a living itinerary that changes with the seasons. This knowledge is deeply practical, born from observation. It remembers which berries are poisonous in the spring but sweet in the late summer, which creek runs dry by October, and where the first snowmelt will create a treacherous but passable canyon crossing in April. The map is, in essence, a long-term environmental study, continuously updated and refined across generations, with survival as the ultimate peer review. But this ecological data is never presented as a cold list of facts. It is woven into the responsibilities of stewardship. The song doesn't just inform you of a sacred spring, it instructs you on the proper ceremony to perform there, a ritual that often involves cleaning the area, leaving an offering, or singing a specific verse of thanks. This transforms navigation from a simple act of transit into an act of care. To travel the route is to maintain it, both physically and spiritually. You are not a tourist passing through, you are a custodian checking on the well-being of the country. This creates a powerful feedback loop, where the knowledge that allows you to survive in a place also obligates you to protect it. The map becomes a covenant, a binding agreement between people and place. In a time of profound ecological uncertainty, this model offers a radical shift in perspective. Our dominant mapping tradition has largely been one of extraction, charting resources to be used and spaces to be claimed. These written systems present a cartography of relationship, charting connections to be honored and cycles to be sustained. They suggest that truly knowing a place means knowing its needs and its rhythms, and understanding your role within that system. It asks a question we are only beginning to confront with urgency. What if the purpose of a map is not to show us how to get what we want from a landscape, but to remind us of what we owe to it? That covenant between people and place was not just spiritual, it was the law of the land. In countless indigenous societies, the map itself functioned as a binding legal document and a social contract. It did more than guide a traveler, it defined who had the right to be there, who was responsible for its care, and what rules governed behavior within its bounds. A specific verse in an epic song might detail the exact boundaries of a clan's estate, naming the river that formed its western edge, the mountain that marked its northern limit, and the ancient tree that served as its southeastern corner post. To know and sing that portion of the song was to demonstrate your custodial rights and your obligations. The landscape was the living archive of this legal code, with every rock formation and waterhole serving as a clause in a constitution written not on parchment, but into the very terrain. This system governed everything from resource use to conflict resolution. A network of established trails and marker trees created formal protocols for safe passage between different groups' territories. A stranger approaching a boundary would know to wait at a certain, recognized meeting stone, signaling peaceful intent and requesting permission to enter. Trade routes were not just paths of commerce, but corridors of diplomacy, maintained through reciprocal agreements remembered in shared stories about the journey. The map encoded the rules of engagement, ensuring that movement across a vast continent could happen with a degree of order and predictability, all without a single written treaty or border patrol. This challenges a deeply held modern assumption that complex law requires written statutes and centralized courts. Here, law was performed, recited, and walked. It was decentralized and embedded in common knowledge. A dispute over hunting grounds would not be settled by referencing a legal codex, but by elders from both sides walking the contested area together, singing the relevant and pointing to the physical features that delineated the original agreement made by ancestral beings. The land itself was the witness and the final authority. This made the legal system incredibly resilient and adaptable. As environmental conditions shifted, as rivers changed course or forests regrew, the stories could be carefully adapted by consensus to reflect the new reality, updating the living map and the laws it contained. The system's ultimate enforcement mechanism was social and spiritual. The belief that violating by trespassing or misusing resources would bring disharmony to the community and the land itself. This profound integration of geography, narrative, and law created a stable social order across immense distances. It meant that every person from childhood learned not only how to navigate their world, but also their precise role within its legal and ecological fabric. The map was their title deed, their treaty, and their guide to ethical living, all sung into being with every step they took. That legal code, sung into the stones, offers a clue to our own digital present. The ancient strategies of written cartography are not relics. They are blueprints being rediscovered in the silicon and code of the 21st century. Our most advanced tools for understanding space are beginning to mimic the very principles these cultures mastered, moving beyond the flat, static map toward something more immersive, interconnected, and narrative-driven. Think of the simple hyperlink you click on a word, and you are instantly transported to a new location of information. This is not a linear journey from point A to point B on a flat surface. It is a leap through a conceptual landscape, much like how a verse about a waterhole might connect the traveler to a deeper story about an ancestral serpent. The digital environment allows for these layered pathways, creating a web of meaning rather than a single route. Now, consider the emerging world of virtual and augmented reality. Putting on a headset and walking through a digitally reconstructed ancient city or a detailed model of a human cell is a form of embodied cartography. You are not looking at a two-dimensional drawing. You are inside the map. You learn its scale, its textures, its spatial relationships by moving your own body through it, just as a Marshallese navigator learned the swell patterns by feeling them in a canoe. This technology returns us to a kinesthetic, sensory way of knowing a place, even if that place is virtual. Data visualization is undergoing a similar transformation. Scientists and artists are now creating complex maps of information that incorporate sound, allowing you to hear the rise and fall of stock markets or the density of a forest canopy. Others build narrative visualizations where a dataset unfolds like a story, guiding you through a sequence of events and insights. These are not merely charts. They are experiences designed to make abstract patterns tangible and memorable, using the same sensory principles that made it unforgettable. Even the ancient memory technique of the method of loci, the memory palace, has found a modern home. So-called memory athletes use this exact strategy, placing information they need to remember along a familiar mental journey to achieve astonishing feats of recall. They are, in essence, creating personal, cognitive for data. This convergence suggests a profound shift. For centuries, the written and printed word pushed our interaction with information toward the purely visual and abstract. Now, digital technology is pulling us back toward a more holistic model, one that engages sight, sound, spatial awareness, and narrative. The future of mapping may not be a single, authoritative satellite image on your phone. It might be a layered, interactive story where you can choose to follow the historical migration paths overlaid on the land, listen to the traditional stories attached to each mountain, or see the real-time flow of water through underground aquifers. It becomes a living document, a collaboration between quantitative data and qualitative meaning. In this light, the old ways were not primitive. They were simply ahead of their time, waiting for our technology to catch up to their deep understanding of how the human mind truly learns and navigates. The most advanced map of the future may not just tell us where we are, but help us remember who we are in relation to the world around us, completing a circle that began with a song whispered across a continent. Silk Road caravans moved to a rhythm older than any written ledger. For every scroll of traded silk or parchment map that traveled between N and Constantinople, there flowed a deeper current of knowledge, carried not in saddlebags but in the minds of the guides. These were the sirdars, the caravan masters, and their expertise was an oral atlas of the world's most demanding trade route. They held the living memory of 100 mountain passes, 1,000 water sources, and the subtle, shifting politics of every oasis town along the way. This was not a single map, but a distributed, adaptive intelligence network, passed from father to son, from master to apprentice, through stories, songs, and hard-earned experience. The written itineraries that survive from the period give us names and distances, but they are silent on the crucial, practical wisdom that meant the difference between a profitable journey and a fatal one. That wisdom was protected by design. Consider the wells. In the blistering expanse of the desert or the Iranian plateau, a reliable water source was more valuable than gold, and its location was a closely guarded secret. A guide would not simply note its coordinates, he would memorize it through a sequence of sensory landmarks and cryptic mnemonics. The reliable well might be described in a story as the place where a legendary horse pawed the ground until water sprang forth, located 3 days' ride east of the red sandstone formation that looks like a sleeping camel, and only visible when the low afternoon sun casts a shadow across a specific crack in the earth. This turned vital information into a kind of oral cipher, protecting it from casual discovery by raiders or competing traders. The knowledge was also deeply ecological. Guides knew the language of the desert itself. They could read the faint tracks of specific birds that always flew toward water at dusk. They recognized which hardy, salt-tolerant plants marked the proximity of a subterranean spring. They understood the patterns of the wind-sculpted dunes, knowing that a certain crescent-shaped formation, a barcan, often indicated older, more stable ground where digging might yield a hidden seep. This was a map written in the landscape's own signs, a code that could only be cracked by those initiated into its language. Furthermore, this oral system was remarkably fluid, able to adapt to change with a speed impossible for any written manual. A political conflict could close a traditional pass overnight. A sudden mudslide could erase a known trail. A trusted oasis well could run dry or become controlled by a hostile faction. When such disruptions occurred, the network of caravan guides would communicate the new reality through the grapevine of trade. Information traveled with the speed of the fastest camel along alternative routes. A new mnemonic would be crafted, a new story born from hardship, detailing the detour around the conflict or the newly discovered seep a day's journey to the north. This adaptive intelligence created a resilient system. The Silk Road was not a fixed line on a map. It was a pulsating, ever-shifting web of pathways that responded in real time to environmental and human pressures. The oral tradition was the perfect medium for this, constantly edited and updated by its users, with survival as the ultimate quality control. It reminds us that the greatest networks are not just about moving goods, but about moving knowledge, and sometimes, the most powerful way to carry that knowledge is to hold it in trust, to sing it softly across the mountains, and to embed it in the very stories that give a dangerous journey its meaning. A story told in song still needs a place to begin its melody. Beyond the dance and the chant, the land itself was often marked with permanent prompts, visual anchors that triggered the memory of the entire journey. In the silence of a desert canyon or beneath the shadow of a cedar forest, art became a cartographic key, a symbolic shorthand for the vast oral library. These were not decorations created in isolation, but integral components of a modal system of knowledge, where the visual, the oral, and the performed worked in concert to lock geography into memory. Take the intricate petroglyphs pecked into the sandstone of the American Southwest. A spiral is not just a symbol, it can be a map of a clan's migration, a record of a celestial event like a supernova, or a marker for a solstice alignment where sunlight pierces a specific crack in the rock at dawn. A panel showing a procession of bighorn sheep might trace the actual path those animals take through the maze of canyons, effectively charting a reliable hunting route through difficult terrain. These images served as durable signposts. A traveler arriving at an unfamiliar junction could find the correct petroglyph panel, and its symbols would cue the specific song verse or story segment needed to proceed, linking the immutable rock art directly to the fluid oral narrative. It was a distributed filing system, where the landscape provided the tabs. Across the continent, under the misty skies of the Pacific Northwest, another form of vertical cartography stood tall. The totem pole, often misunderstood as a religious idol, is in fact a profound historical document carved in cedar. For the Haida, Tlingit, and other coastal peoples, these poles could function as territorial markers and clan archives. The stacked figures, from the foundational bear or wolf at the base to the thunderbird at the top, tell a specific story of lineage and place. A pole erected at the mouth of a river might depict the ancestral being who discovered that river, the animal spirits associated with its bounty, and the symbols of the clan who held stewardship over its waters and the surrounding lands. To a member of that clan, or to a neighboring group familiar with the symbolic language, the pole was a legal and geographical statement. It communicated, "This is who we are, this is our story connected to this specific land, and these are our responsibilities here." It condensed a complex web of relationships, treaties, and histories into a single, powerful visual anchor, around which the detailed oral histories would be recounted for each new generation. And as we've seen in the Andes, this symbolic encoding reached its zenith in woven threads. The patterns on an Inca tunic were a portable, geometric language. Each small, repeating design likely held specific meaning, referencing a place, a social structure, or a concept within the empire's cosmic order. Wearing such a garment was like wearing a map of one's authority and identity, a textile that connected the individual to the vast, organized geography of the system. The common thread through all these examples, from rock art to totems to textiles, is that they were never meant to stand alone. A petroglyph without its accompanying story is a locked book. A totem pole without the oral history of each crest figure is a beautiful but silent sentinel. These artistic creations were the visual indices in a grand, living library whose full texts were held in human memory. They provided the hook, the starting point, the mnemonic device that launched the recitation of the song, the chant of the genealogy, or the recital of the route. This synergy created an incredibly robust system. If one mode was compromised, if a song was partially forgotten, the visual symbol could help recover it. If a totem pole fell, the stories it represented could guide its replication. It was knowledge storage with built-in redundancy, proving that the most enduring maps are those that engage multiple senses, inviting us not just to see a territory, but to read its stories in stone, wood, and thread. Yet the very landscapes that hold these maps are now shifting. The Arctic ice that taught the Inuit its language of lades and pressure ridges is thinning, its rhythms becoming unpredictable. The desert springs marked in ancient are drying under prolonged droughts. The coral atolls whose surrounding swells were modeled in stick charts face rising seas that could redraw their coastlines entirely. Climate change is not just altering environments, it is erasing the physical pages of a living library, dissolving the reference points that have anchored these knowledge systems for. When the ice no longer forms the same way, or the distinctive tree that marked a turn in the trail perishes, a verse in a song loses its anchor in the visible world, and a crucial link in the chain of memory can go silent. This is a race against time, not just to document a culture, but to preserve a dialogue with a planet that is speaking in a new and urgent voice. Simultaneously, the chains of oral transmission themselves are under strain. The pressures of globalization, language loss, and the disruption of traditional lifestyles mean that elders who hold these vast mental maps often find fewer young apprentices able to dedicate the years needed to learn them fully. When a language fades, it takes with it the precise words, the subtle inflections, and the cultural concepts embedded in the guiding chants and stories. A translated into English may convey a route, but it can lose the layered meanings, the ecological puns, and the spiritual resonance that made it unforgettable and legally binding in its original tongue. This creates a double vanishing, where both the teachers and the very medium of instruction are at risk. In response, urgent preservation projects have emerged worldwide. Anthropologists, linguists, and community leaders are collaborating to record elders, walking the country with them, filming their explanations, and mapping with global positioning system technology. These efforts are vital archives, creating a digital backup of knowledge that might otherwise be lost. Yet they also confront a profound paradox. The act of recording, of fixing a living performance into a static digital file, can inadvertently fossilize the knowledge. It is not a recording, it is an event, renewed and subtly adapted with each performance. A star path is not a chart, it is a relationship with the night sky that changes with the observer's location and the season. By placing these dynamic systems into an archive, we risk turning a living conversation into a museum exhibit, preserving the words but losing the breath that gave them life. The challenge, then, is not merely to document, but to revitalize. The most successful projects are those that support communities in teaching the knowledge on its own terms, creating new contexts for its use. This might mean supporting Indigenous language schools where children learn the old songs, or funding youth programs that take them out on the land with elders, or backing legal efforts that recognize as evidence of enduring connection to country. The goal is not to put the map in a glass case, but to ensure the song is still sung, the dance is still performed, and the stars are still read by a new generation. This is about keeping a unique way of knowing, and therefore a unique way of mapping the world, alive and responsive. It recognizes that these systems are not just about the past, they are vital compasses for navigating an uncertain future, offering models of resilience, deep observation, and sustainable relationship with place that the entire world now desperately needs to learn. This realization rewrites the foundational stories we tell ourselves about the world. For centuries, our history books have celebrated the age of exploration as a time when brave European navigators discovered new lands. But what does that word, discovery, truly mean when you arrive on a shore where every bay and mountain has a name, every path is sung, and the people have governed its ecology for thousands of years? From their perspective, it was not a discovery, but a meeting, and often a misunderstanding of colossal proportions. To call it discovery is to accept the map of the newcomers as the only valid one, and to declare all other maps invisible. When we integrate the reality of written cartography, the narrative shifts from one of finding emptiness to one of encountering profound, existing knowledge. The continent of Australia, for instance, was not a terra, an empty land. It was a continent fully charted by an intricate network of a living atlas that detailed every resource and boundary. The Americas were not a wilderness awaiting European order, but a mosaic of territories meticulously managed through systems like the Inca or the legal geographies encoded in oral tradition. These were not passive landscapes, but actively known and cared for homelands. The so-called explorers, then, were not the first to map these places. They were often the first to be lost in them without local guidance. Their technological advantage, the compass, the sextant, and the printed chart, was not a superior form of intelligence, but a different toolkit, one particularly effective for long-distance voyaging and, crucially, for claiming possession. The written map, with its clear lines and authoritative appearance, became the perfect legal instrument for empire. It allowed a distant crown to divide a continent it had never walked, drawing borders that sliced through and ignored centuries-old agreements held in story. This was not a meeting of equals, but a collision of worldviews, where one system had the warships and the printing press to make its version of reality the official one. To correct the historical record is not to diminish the maritime achievements of figures like Columbus or Cook, but to properly contextualize them. They were navigating toward lands that were already home to master navigators in their own right. Their true achievement was not discovery, but connection, however fraught and violent that connection proved to be. Acknowledging this does something powerful. It restores agency and intellect to indigenous peoples, not as primitive inhabitants, but as the original scientists and cartographers of their continents. They possessed a deep, empirical understanding of their environment, a science of place refined over. Their maps were not guesses. They were tested technologies for survival and social order. When we see the Polynesian settlement of the Pacific as intentional navigation rather than accidental drift, when we understand the Amazon as a biocartographic network rather than a green hell, we are not just changing a detail, we are fundamentally remapping human history itself. It becomes a story of many parallel geniuses, of diverse solutions to the universal human challenges of orientation, memory, and belonging. This reframing is not about the past alone, it shapes our present. It asks us whose knowledge we value when facing ecological crises, and whose maps we consult when making decisions about the land. It suggests that the oldest maps might still hold the wisest directions for finding a sustainable way home. That distinction between space and place is the final, and perhaps most important, frontier of this entire story. Western cartography, for all its technical brilliance, is primarily a science of space. It takes the complex, textured world and reduces it to a measurable, uniform grid of longitude and latitude. Its goal is abstraction, to create a neutral framework where any location can be defined by coordinates, divorced from its local character. This map asks a single, powerful question: how do I get from point A to point B? It is a tool for movement and possession, perfect for plotting a sea route, drawing a property line, or launching a satellite. But in this process of abstraction, something essential is often filtered out: the meaning of the location itself. The coordinate does not tell you that this hill is where a great peace treaty was signed, that this bend in the river is where the salmon run strongest in autumn, or that this cave is a sacred site where ceremonies have been held for 1,000 years. The grid sees only empty space waiting to be filled. Written systems, in stark contrast, are the cartography of place. A place is not an abstract point. It is a location saturated with story, memory, obligation, and life. That does not traverse empty space. It connects a series of powerful places, each one defined by what happened there in the ancestral past and what happens there now in the seasonal cycle. The map does not just provide a route, it provides a reason for the route and a set of rules for traveling it. It answers deeper questions: what happened here that makes it significant? What must I do when I arrive to honor that significance? What is my relationship to this rock, this spring, this stretch of coast? This is a fundamentally different way of understanding reality. Philosophers call it a different ontology, a different way of being. In the ontology of the grid, humans are detached observers, looking down on a world that is separate from us, a resource to be measured and used. In the ontology of the system, humans are participants, characters in a story that is still unfolding across a landscape that is alive and speaking. We are not above the map, we are inside it. The land is not a backdrop, it is a relative, an ancestor, a teacher. This worldview offers a profound corrective to a very modern ailment, a deep sense of disconnection from our environment. Many of us today live in a world of generic spaces, interchangeable suburbs, anonymous digital coordinates, and landscapes we fly over but never truly know. We navigate with global positioning systems that give us efficient routes, but tell us nothing of the stories beneath the asphalt. We feel unrooted because we are navigating space, not inhabiting place. The old maps suggest a different path. They teach that to truly know a territory is to be in relationship with it, to learn its stories and accept your responsibilities within them. It means seeing a forest not as a collection of timber resources or carbon sinks, but as a community of beings with its own history, a place where specific events transpired and whose health is intertwined with your own. This is not a romantic fantasy. It is a practical, ethical, and ecological orientation. It suggests that sustainability is not just a technical problem of resource management, but a relational one. You are far less likely to poison a river if your creation story says your ancestors emerged from its waters, or if your song details how its clean flow sustains the medicinal plants for miles downstream. The map, in this sense, becomes a guide to ethical living. It embeds the law of reciprocity into the very knowledge of the land. To follow the map is to agree to its terms. This ancient understanding now echoes in the most pressing conversations of our time. Environmental philosophers speak of learning to live as members of a biotic community rather than as its conquerors. Urban designers strive to create places with character and memory, not just functional spaces. The recovery of indigenous land management practices, like cultural burning, shows how story-based knowledge can lead to healthier ecosystems than abstract resource management alone. The written maps were doing this all along. They were technologies for sustaining complex relationships over deep time. They remind us that a location without a story is just coordinates, but a place with a story is a home, a sanctuary, a part of who you are. In the end, the most accurate map may not be the one that can guide a rocket to the moon, but the one that can guide a community to live in lasting balance with its world. By remembering that every step you take is part of an ancient and ongoing conversation. The future of how we navigate our world may not lie in a single method, but in a conversation between them. Imagine a map that shows not just the contour lines of a mountain range, but the ancient song that details where to find water on its eastern slope during a drought. This synthesis is already happening through participatory mapping, a collaborative process where technology becomes a tool for amplifying voices, not silencing them. In places like the Amazon rainforest or the Australian outback, community elders are partnering with geographers, using handheld global positioning system units and geographic information system software. But they are not merely plotting points, they are telling stories. As an elder walks a traditional route, every pause at a sacred tree, every bend in a creek mentioned in a story is recorded. The resulting digital map is layered. It shows the satellite image, but it also contains audio files of the songs, video interviews explaining the significance of a rock art site, and notes on which plants in an area have medicinal uses. This creates a powerful hybrid, a map that honors the deep, qualitative knowledge of place while utilizing the quantitative precision of modern tools for a critical purpose, advocacy. These maps are becoming vital evidence in land rights cases, providing courts with a tangible, legally recognizable document that validates oral histories and demonstrates enduring connection to country. They translate into a format the modern world can understand, without stripping away its soul. This integration acknowledges a profound truth, that the elevation of a mountain is a fact, but the story of why that mountain is sacred is a meaning, and both are essential to truly knowing it. It moves us beyond the false choice between tradition and technology, suggesting instead that the most complete understanding emerges when they work in concert. The stick chart modeled the ocean's energy, the performed the land's memory, and now, the digital participatory map can give that memory a new kind of permanence and reach. This is not about replacing one system with another, but about creating a new, richer cartographic language, one that can hold both the coordinate and the chorus, the boundary and the belonging. In this fusion, the oldest ways of seeing the world offer a crucial layer of wisdom for the most modern maps, guiding us toward a future where we navigate not just spaces, but the stories that make them places worth caring for. The journey ends where it began, with a simple question. What does it truly mean to know a place? We have crossed oceans by the feel of a swell, traced continents through the rhythm of a song, and walked the sacred lines of empires woven into cloth and stone. We have seen that long before a single coastline was inked onto parchment, the human mind had already charted the world in memory, transforming observation into an art and wayfinding into a covenant. These systems were not primitive precursors to real maps. They were the real maps, masterpieces of cognitive engineering designed for survival, law, and deep belonging. They prove that our ancestors were not wandering blindly, but navigating with a science so seamlessly woven into culture that we almost missed its genius entirely. The Marshall Islands stick chart is a thesis on fluid dynamics. The Polynesian star compass is a working model of celestial mechanics. The Australian is a living database of ecology and ethics. Each one is a monument to human adaptability, a unique answer to the universal need to find our way and to understand our role in the landscape we traverse. This changes the story of exploration itself. It was never a single narrative of discovery written by one tradition, but a chorus of countless explorations, each culture mapping its world in the language it knew best. Some wrote in ink, others in melody, in dance, in the very arrangement of shells on a lattice of palm ribs. The brilliance lies in the diversity of the solutions. So what do these ancient maps ask of us today? In an age of satellite precision and digital grids, they offer a crucial reminder. Precision is not the same as wisdom. A coordinate can tell you where you are, but it cannot tell you why you should care. It cannot impart the responsibility that comes with knowledge, the understanding that to know a spring's location is also to know the ceremony required to keep it clean. As we confront planetary challenges of habitat loss and climate disruption, these written systems point toward a different kind of intelligence, one rooted in relationship and long-term stewardship. They model a way of engaging with the world that sees it not as a collection of resources to be indexed, but as a community of meaning to be sustained. They teach that the most enduring maps are those that guide not only our feet, but our hearts. They show us that to navigate the future, we may need to recover some of the oldest skills of all, the art of listening to the land, of remembering the stories, and of walking with care. The world has always been full of maps, written in 1,000 beautiful and forgotten languages. Our task is not to replace them, but to learn to listen, to hear the songs still whispered in the stones and the stars, and to remember that every place, if you know how to read it, has a story waiting to guide you home.